Unless the grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains just a grain of wheat. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. It would not surprise me that Jesus said that, in part, one, to remind himself that the inner work we all need to do to be fully alive for the world is something that he would need to continue to do to the end. Two, to help himself remember that it is worth it, because that work is always just so dang hard. And three, to prepare himself for the big dying, that cross of suffering that seemed to cast a growing shadow. Throughout his life, Jesus had done that crucial inner work of letting the grains of wheat in him die so that they could bear much fruit, that a truly alive and free human would emerge for the world. You know, practicing the inner disciplines which allowed him to fully embrace his feelings while not letting them control him. Dying to the temptation to selfishness and ego, and so being able to see our common humanity in a bigger dream which included the outcast, the vulnerable, the poor, all that work. And now it is becoming clearer to Jesus that the next grain of wheat to die would be his own body. His goodness would cost him his life. You see, Jesus had become a threat to the wallets of the powerful and the protected who took advantage of the vulnerable. The writing on the wall was getting clearer. Jesus would face great suffering and most likely even death. And Jesus, of course, did not like that very much. On this day when we hear him say, unless the grain of wheat falls to the earth and dies, we also hear him say that he was afraid. I mean, he did not want to suffer. He did not want to die. He says, I am troubled now. Yet what should I say? Father, save me from this hour? But it was for this purpose that I came to this hour. Paul describes today the tears in the eyes of Jesus as he wrestles with this truth. Because of the inner work he had done, Jesus had learned to trust that his dyings were worth it, that they yielded authentic life. And he chose to trust that this dying too would be worth it, that in ways he could not see or even imagine, it would make a difference for this world. But it was still frightening and painful for Jesus. And I think it's good for us to remember that, because it's frightening and painful for us as well. I think that on one level, you and I know that it is worth it to do the hard work of becoming more alive and free human beings. Some part of us has seen the blessings that comes from doing the inner work that allows the grains of wheat in us to die, to become more who we could be for the world. But sometimes it's hard to remember that it's worth it. It's hard sometimes to trust that. It's partly why we need community to remind us, to inspire us, to call that forth in us, which is why I'm going to leave this pulpit for just a bit and speak from this heart in the hopes that you hear words from that heart, the Sacred Heart of Jesus. To all of you who are doing that difficult inner work to become more alive and free and true, thank you. Working so that those grains of wheat in you can die, it's just so hard, isn't it? It's messy, painful work, but it's so worth it. It is. Please trust that. It's so worth it because it yields a better you for the world and for yourself. To all of you who have been willing to go to a counselor, get help for that addiction, work on that impulse to anger, ask others for feedback on how you can be a better person. It's hard, isn't it? But haven't you seen a blessing from it? And I know God would say, thank you. To all of you who are kind to that new kid at school, to all who are friendly to that clerk, respectful to that person who cuts the grass, thoughtful of that person who cleans the floors, thank you. And isn't it a joy to see them as people? And I hope somebody does that for you as well. Thank you to all of you who care for a child with any form of disability, who have welcomed an aging parent or in-law into your home, who make time for that neighbor who struggles, who include that person that others think might be different. It's hard, but it's made your soul bigger, hasn't it? For all of you who resist the urge to label people, to decide that people are categories, right? For all the ways you do the messy work to expand your thinking and soften your heart to remember that we are one human family. Thank you. For instead of vehemently standing up for your rights, you wrestle with how to care for the common good of all. It's so hard. Especially these days. But isn't it a blessing to remember that you're part of something so much bigger than some suggest? With all my heart, I believe God would say thank you. And for all who do the tough work to be good dads or daughters, sons or moms or friends, and all the effort that takes, even things like listening really hard for the subtle promptings to know when it is best to speak and when it is best to be silent. Thank you for that work. And to all who are kind and humble and generous in ways that no one will ever know, who don't do it for glory, but because of the goodness of your heart, who do what you do just because it's the right thing to do, it's the kind thing to do. And even though it would be easier not to, deep down, don't you know something of God in here, in those moments? I hope you do. Because every time I see you doing any of these things I just mentioned, I see something of God in you. It's always hard, these grain of wheat choices. For Jesus, it was all the inner dyings that he had done along the way that helped him to trust that this next big one would be worth it too. May God help each of us trust that it is worth it. And I hope and pray that on some level you already feel that you know that this work does yield a more healthier and free and better you for a better world. Today, I believe that God wanted you to hear thank you. That all those dyings don't go unnoticed. That deep down they're worth it. And I trust this. On some level, you already know that's true, don't you?